Okay, so welcome everyone, and welcome to the UCI Summit, the first summit. Very excited to be here and having the opportunity to talk about authoring books for learning VR and AR development. Um, so I'll start out by just telling a story that before I got into VR and Unity, I was a full stack web developer, and I would was trying to learn things and develop some projects. And so whenever I couldn't figure something out, I would Google it and find a blog post or some kind of article that would, help give me the answer. And then as I got improved my skills, I started, there were problems that I was searching for and I couldn't find the answer. So I ended up having to figure it out myself. And so then I started writing that up as a way of kind of paying forward or giving back to the community by sharing my own learning curve. Then back in 2014, and I read about the Oculus acquisition by Facebook, and I'm like, and I had always had a strong interest in and background in 3D graphics, even though I had been doing more web development before that. And I was like, what is this thing? And so I ordered my developer kit and began learning Unity. And as I was learning Unity, I was realizing, all right, I'm on a learning curve here. I ought to write this up as a blog post. And then I realized, wait a minute, this is more than a blog post. This is a book. So I was like, well, should I self-publish or should I go to a publisher? So I was kind of toying, but I had this idea of what I wanted to do to sort of capture the learning curve and share that and explain, using my I did have background in 3D graphics and software development, and wanted to share this. So I sent a proposal to some book publishers as well, including Pack Publishing, and they came back to me and said, "Oh yeah, we have a author kit here. Here, and you just fill out these questions, and then we'll evaluate your idea." So I filled that out, and like a week or two later, they came back and they said, "Well, you made it past the first round of review, and we are interested in a book on Unity and VR development. Give us a more detailed outline, and then we'll send that up to the editorial committee." And so I did that work, and then like 2 weeks after that, they came back to me and they said, "Yes, we're going to do a book, and here's your contract." And I'm like, oh crap, now I have to write this book. So that was like January, February of 2015, and I just was obsessed. It was like every night I'm like working on, I had a day job, but I would come home and I would work on this thing, and it actually got published within 6 months, August that same year. And I'll tell you more about that first book and my other books subsequent to that as we go through this talk. But I was like, I turned to she's like, "Why are you so obsessed with it?" I'm like, I feel like there's this book, this thing is inside of me, and it needs to get out, and I'm just in its way, and I'm just like, just by writing it just has a form of its own. And my wife turned to me and she says, "It sounds like you're pregnant." So I'm sure you all have had this similar experience, not just for writing, but other things like games or development or other projects that you work on, where you sort of have a vision, and then it's like you just have to do it. Now, subsequent books were not necessarily as inspired because I was familiar with the process, and there's always a long period of just heads down cranking the stuff out. So my talk today, I'm going to be I'll introduce myself a little bit more, but I will also then talk more about the process and my experience in writing books. So, to that anecdote story, I have this nice quote from Michelangelo in the 1500s. A similar experience, not to compare myself, but I'm just saying this as part of the creative process. Carving is easy, he said. You just go down to the skin and stop. Every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it. So, hello, my name is Jonathan Linowes, and I am a Unity XR developer. I recently this year became a Unity certified instructor. I teach Unity workshops. I've given lots of talks at meetups and conferences, and helped organize the Reality Virtually Hackathon for a couple of years as a lead mentor at the MIT Media Lab. I'm a graduate from the MIT Media Lab years ago, and so I have my contact information here. Feel free to reach out to me and connect with me. That'd be great. My company is Parker Hill XR Studio. It's also known as Parker Hill Reality Labs. We develop XR games and applications. We've written some developer tools, including the Bridge XR toolkit that's out on the Asset Store, and provide services, project management services, and written books and pretty active in the community. The company is basically me, and I form teams on a project basis based on the requirements. So my book, Unity Virtual Reality Projects, this is the third edition of the book that just came out in August, and I will talk about that journey a bit. But the first edition was in 2015, and then the second edition. So the first edition, was the DK2, the Oculus, and Cardboard were really the only VR devices out there. And then later that fall, Vive came out with Room Scale, and then the next spring, Oculus came out with the touch controllers, and there's lots of things going on. I went back to the publisher. I said, we need to do a revision on this book, and they said, sure, that sounds good. So I worked on the second edition that came out in May 2018, and that included room scale and touch controllers, and rearrange some things. And then and I'll go through the scenario also in some more detail. And then the third book, the third edition, was again based on now the XR platform and XR interaction toolkit, so we could build projects to a specific a single SDK. But between the first, right after the first edition, they came to me and said, we really would like you to do an AR book. And so in 2017, I invited a colleague of mine, Christian, to co-author with me the augmented reality for developers book. That it was also a Unity-based book, and uses Vuforia. Since then, we've now, we now have AR Foundation, and so I'm looking at doing a new book based on that. Prior to that, I'm sort of jumping around my timeline here. The publisher said, well, we would like you to do a Cardboard VR book, not Unity, but straight Android. And so again, I connected with a friend of mine, Matt Schoen, and who was an Android and VR and graphics guru, and we wrote this book that's actually a Java-based book. It's a little bit, I haven't looked at revising this, but we actually build a game engine, or not a game engine, but a 3D rendering engine, and use some 3D math libraries and stuff, and build some projects like solar systems and and stuff with that. And the frustration there was when we decided to try to time the release of the book with the with the Google I/O conference that May, that year, and that was the conference that they changed Cardboard name to Daydream, and the SDKs and stuff were namespaced differently. So on the day that the book came out, it was already a little bit dated, and that's part of the risk that we're trying to manage here. So, stepping back, and it's like, well, why write and publish a book? And so I already mentioned this idea of kind of giving back and sharing my knowledge. Life is an ongoing learning curve, and as you gain expertise in one thing, and you start, you're always like learning other things. And so there's, that's why we teach. That's why we're part of the UCI community. That's why Unity has such an investment in the Unity Learn ecosystem. But there's also, from my early experiences is that I learn personally when I write. I mean, as they say, it's kind of an idiom now, but the best way to make sure you understand something is to try to explain it to someone else. And so that is part of this, the reason for doing, for writing. It also feels good. I mean, it's the sense of accomplishment, the sense of getting something on paper is sort of that concreteness. As a consultant and as having my own company, it gives you credibility. You go and meet people and you say, I wrote a book, and they're like, oh wow, you wrote a book. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's more like a blog post on steroids, but it's my book anyway. It's not an academic research type book. It's more of a how-to book, but still it gives you credentials, it's a reputation, and it's good for your business. And I would say last on the list is income. It may help, buy coffee or maybe a vacation or something, but it's not, I wouldn't do this to pay the rent. So also, stepping back even further, it's sort of like, where does, book publishing fit in the spectrum of publishing opportunities that we have nowadays? And so this is kind of just a jotting down of a spectrum that you could look at, social media as, in a way, a publishing platform, if you will. I mean, 140 characters doesn't give you a whole lot to speak with. And of course, we know how caustic social media can be. But at the same time, it is a way of sharing, and if it's used. And it also, because of the social network there, you're connecting with a community, and so there's a lot of value there that you're adding, and reputation. And maybe Reddit is a better example of something that could be really more productive than Twitter, let's say. Then sort of moving in forward, there's, blogging, and whether that's sort of your own blogging website, which is what we used to do, or something like medium.com, which is really established writers, and it's a no-brainer to jump into doing blogging. So I pivoted my blog from a private website to medium.com years ago. Then there's, articles, which is kind of like blogging, but, it may get published in newspaper. Well, not newspapers. I don't think they exist anymore. Not magazines, but there are sort of like Game of Sutra, so basically industry websites that you write posts for and they publish it. So maybe that's the big difference there between blogging and articles, is that there's a little bit of an editorial a review, and someone else is publishing it, but you're authoring it. Then there's podcasts. I did a podcast for several years called Uncle Johnny's Virtual Reality Podcast, and it was a lot of fun. And it was actually, I did it with my son when he was in college, and so he was kind of the straight man, and I would, he would like ask me questions, and I would answer, things about VR, and we would talk about the news, we would talk about development, we would talk about the technology, and we did 160 episodes, I think, but over a period of a couple of years. And then, we shifted away from that. Part of the reason was really there was a demand for podcasts to bring in people to interview, and the format got much more professional. I was doing more of an ad hoc production quality, so that tech expectations moved on, so we did too. And then there's YouTube videos, and there's the whole ecosystem there. And then there's books, and again, in the books you could self-publish, or you can go through a publisher, and that's So as you can see, this is kind of a journey, and sort of paralleling that spectrum. I have over the years, back when I was a graduate student, I wrote in articles. It was funny. I had written an article, and my daughter, who's now in college, a few months ago, sent me a screen capture. She's like, I was researching something, and I found this article that has your name on it from Byte magazine, and what is this? And so that was kind of funny. But they're, then building websites and white papers. That is sort of an ongoing thing that I do. And let's see, newsletters, blogs, and so forth. So I mentioned a number of these. So, it's like, how do you get into this yourself? And, it's just, you have to it's a mindset, it's a habit. You have to kind of do it a lot and not worry about who's reading your stuff, at least in the beginning. And so there's maybe sort of more like journaling, or, no one's going to hate you if you write a crappy article. They'll just ignore you. But if you write a great one, then they'll remember you. And that's a general principle. It's maybe the world's a little more caustic these days, but still, I think that principle holds. Here's some sort of famous quotes about writing and the habit of writing. So if you actually Google writing as a habit, you can find a ton of books and things, just to kind of get you inspired if you want to work your way through it. So, how do you go about writing a book? And so I sort of mentioned my timeline. Here's an actual timeline of the book. So I had my 2015 book, then the cardboard book came out in 2016, then the AR Euphoria book in 2017, then the second edition of the VR book in 2018. Then I was going to do a second edition of the AR book in 2019, but then AR Foundation came out, so we scrapped that, and instead I worked on the third edition of the VR book that just came out, and now we're going to do basically a new book on AR. So I mentioned sort of how this started out. This is kind of what the book was about. There was, introduction to virtual reality, introduction to Unity and objects and scale, doing build and run and sort of target platform specific issues. And then we kind of get into first sort of gaze-based project, and then world space UI, which is a very important concept. So, we're dealing with explaining, and getting people comfortable with 3D spaces, and interacting first with just the head, and then we start to get in there as a first-person character, first-person camera, moving through the scene, interacting with the scene. Then we start getting into some physics and interactivity, and a few other projects, and as the book. So this was the first book. Then the second book, as I mentioned, had to deal with both room scale and hand controllers and 3DOF, like Gear VR and Google Cardboard. And we bumped up the Unity version. So, it was highlighted here are just some of the changes in the second edition. More of an emphasis on content, and importing objects, using your hands, at least hand controllers. And we added a chapter on locomotion and teleportation. And then the physics project. It was funny in the first book. I had one of the things was you climbed up or took an elevator up to a platform and jumped off and bounced up and down on a trampoline. And turns out that's not a great thing to do in VR. So I modified that into a more of a paddleball game that is kind of like Beat Saber or whatever, that the fireballs come at you with to the beat of the music. We use a open source project to capture those beat events. And I added a chapter on optimization and performance, and using, for example, the Unity profiler. And so then the third edition of the book, I was able to move away from platform-specific SDKs and use the XR Interaction Toolkit. And so there's a little bit more in-depth going into Unity and prefabs, because also in the new Unity we have the nested prefabs and some good stuff that you can do there. I added a chapter on lighting and rendering and realism. I took out the chapter on multiplayer because Unity's own multiplayer networking stuff is in transition. So, and that it's a pretty complicated topic anyway. So I instead talk about timeline and an animation VR storytelling project. So what is the process involved in actually writing your own book? So and my publisher that I was working with is Pact Publishing, and they you start out with a acquisition editor who evaluates your proposal and sort of works with you to kind of make sure that in the proposal, it's actually a great document that they ask you. It's like, who's your target? What are the learning objectives? What's the structure of the book? What one chapter to the next, a description and learning objectives and skills learned, and so you really break it down into a detailed outline, and from that, then they turn that into a delivery schedule, saying you're going to do how many pages per chapter and how many and how much time, 10 days, 2 weeks per chapter, that and they put together a schedule, and then based on that schedule they will then give you a contract, and the contract also includes sort of what the tranches are for the advances. That you get a certain, a portion up front, a portion when the first drafts are done, a portion then when it's actually published. And this contract schedule is based on the detailed outline that you gave them. And once all that's signed, you're handed off to a senior editor who works with you on the first few chapters, and you're making sure that their style guidelines are adhered to, and it just kind of gives you good writing tips. And kind of once you get past that, then you're handed off to, I guess, a slightly junior editor who works with you for the rest of the book until the first drafts are done. And then you are introduced to a technical editor who will actually go through the projects and implement them and check it for technical accuracy, as well as a production editor who does, sort of the production formatting, and you get final drafts that I then approve and sign off on, and then you're handed off to a sort of a post-production editor or marketing person that helps you be involved in the publicity, as well as any kind of follow-up with if there's erratas, or usually not many in my books, but so I sort of jumped through all these details here. So I have some slides that explains what I just did. So you have your acquisition editor, and you give your pitch and your detailed outline and your schedule, and then your contract. And then you have your senior editor who sets you up with their editing tools, and you do the first few chapters with them. And then you have your content development editor, a little more junior person that works with you on the subsequent chapters and makes sure that things are as expected. Then your tech editor and the final drafts, and then your author relations team. So I have a few minutes left, and I'll just use this to kind of share with you what is in the current version of my book. So the first chapter is, what is virtual reality? What a brief history of sort of stereoscopic photography and early days of VR, and then what the industry is, and what the skill sets involved in doing VR. So it's kind of an overview. And then the second chapter, you install Unity. I give you a tour of Unity, the tour of the Unity editor, using prefabs, and we build like this 3D diorama scene, and it's 3D. It's not VR yet. Talk about render pipelines, especially if the problems with shaders and importing assets. Then the third chapter, we actually set up for VR. We install the XR plugin and the interaction toolkit, and talk about that architecture and add a camera rig, and also build and run for your target platform. So if there's any then target platform specific installs that you need to do. So you basically want to get to the point where you take the diorama scene we did in the previous chapter and get it to run in your VR device. The next step we talk about is using the head for gaze input, and we create a little zombie, turn Ethan into a zombie, and do some build a nav mesh, and he runs around, and you can stare at him and kill him with your laser beam eyes. So we introduce some particles and stuff like that. Then in this chapter 5, we introduce the hand controllers, and so an input so we create and talk a little bit about events and some other software patterns. But the project here is you can pick up a gun and you pull the trigger and it blows balloons up. So it's a balloon gun, and then you can pick up the ball and throw it at the balloon to pop the balloon. So you can kind of make a little interactive experience there. The next step, we talk about WorldSpace UI and canvases and a bunch of different ways that WorldSpace canvases are used, both as in-game, like scoreboards and info bubbles, and as well as sort of dashboards and wrist palettes. And so different ways that you can use a WorldSpace canvas in UI for input. And so we, again, use that same scene. We play around with some additional particle effects and input events. Then we talk about locomotion and teleportation. So the locomotion, moving around the scene. One of the projects is a climbing wall, so it's locomotion in a vertical direction. And then the teleport system in the XR Interaction Toolkit for jumping around scenes, and talk about some of the comfort issues and how to use the vignette and other techniques for making teleportation, locomotion more comfortable. The next chapter is on lighting and rendering, and basically I dissect the demo scene in the Universal Render Pipeline template, and we build a menu palette that lets you toggle a bunch of the different lighting and rendering parameters in the scene. So you can toggle like material properties, the lighting properties, the light probes, and post-process stack. And so you really get to experience hands-on what these different settings do inside of VR. The next project is on is a physics game. So it's this paddle game that we start out just hitting a ball with a paddle, and then we juice it up with a nice environment that is free to download off the asset store, and add some particle effects, and then set that the launching of those balls at you as to the beat of a music, and you can add your own MP3 file, and at each beat the balls will come shooting at you, and you have to whack them back and try to hit a target. The next project is an art gallery, and we use Pro Builder to create an environment and then create kind of an art rig with a spotlight and a frame and a picture. And we do some data I/O using I think it's JSON files or CSV file. I forget what we used, but and that has sort of information about each of the paintings and the artwork, and then and create an interactive environment that you can teleport around and click on a picture to see more details about that particular object. Next, we talk about the whole idea of 360 media and equirectangular images. We build a couple of things on the right over here. It's like a Christmas ornament that you can kind of put up to your head and see inside it. So from the outside, it's a solid shell, and on the inside, it's a 360 picture. It's kind of cool. And then we do a 360 photo browser that grabs pictures off the web using URLs for the source and a menu palette, and you can go and toggle between your images, so you can see how to make your own image gallery there. Then we have a cool project using timeline and animation and VR storytelling set to the tune of Paul McCartney's Blackbird song, Blackbird Singing in the Dead of Night. And it starts out with a little, like a nest. The tree kind of grows from a seedling up to a tree. A nest falls out of the sky. Inside is an egg. The egg starts wiggling. It hatches. A bird comes out. The bird starts hopping around, learning how to get its wings, and then eventually takes off and flies away. And so we build that whole thing. We deal with timeline tracks for the audio, for the animations, for activating and deactivating objects, for lighting as well. And so that's kind of a fun project. not brilliant. It's, if you were a fifth grader and handed in, you probably get an A on the project. And then the last chapter is on, profiling and analytics and how to optimize the scene, and some of these issues with batching on the GPU and optimizing your artwork, trying to minimize the number of polys and other issues around. Also we talked some about coding best practices for optimization, and just issues that are important for VR for that render to pixel latency, minimizing that. Okay, so the books are available on Amazon and Pact Publishing, and I think my time is up, so maybe went over a little bit. So I appreciate your attention, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I'll be around. And have a great day. Thanks.